Picture this for a second. You're browsing the web, but there is absolutely zero color. Just stark black text on a blindingly blank white background. Sounds pretty brutal, right? Well, before CSS came along, that was often the reality of the early internet. Today, we're diving into CSS, cascading style sheets, and really looking at it as the magic that brings our modern digital canvas to life. Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to unpack the exact properties developers use every day to transform plain text into visually stunning experiences.
Real quick, here's our game plan for this explainer. First, we'll look at painting with CSS colors, then how to precisely specify those colors, followed by mastering CSS font families, and finally, controlling font size and style. All right, let's jump right into part one, painting with CSS colors, which is basically your digital palette.
You know, it's wild to think that with CSS, we can combine just 3 basic colors, red, blue, and green, to create literally millions of dynamic combinations for our screens. And we basically have 5 main ways to slap that paint onto our web elements. We aren't just broadly washing a whole page with color. We can specifically target the text itself, the backgrounds behind that text, the borders framing our containers, the outlines drawn just outside those borders, and even the color of our underlines or strike-throughs using the text decoration color property. Now, a super common mix-up when you're first getting the hang of this is confusing the color property with the background color property. But the rule is actually really straightforward. The color property paints the text foreground itself, like the actual letters you're reading. Meanwhile, background color paints the canvas directly behind that text. They do their own thing and work completely independently of one another. Moving right along to section 2, how we actually specify those colors and mix the paint. So we know where we want to paint, but how do we mix the exact shade we're looking for? Because we are way past just typing out predefined names like red, blue, or purple. We usually start with RGB. This stands for red, green, and blue, and it is the absolute foundational formula for mixing the light that makes up every single screen you look at, from the phone in your hand to your computer monitor. And here is the magic number you really got to commit to memory: 255. What's super fascinating here is that developers operate within strict mathematical boundaries. Every single RGB value ranges exactly from 0, which means literally none of that colored light is present, all the way up to 255, which means that specific color light is cranked up to its absolute maximum brightness.
But let's be honest, typing out those 3 separate numbers all the time gets pretty tedious. So if you don't want to use the RGB format, you can just use hex codes. A hex code always kicks off with a hashtag, or a £, followed by 6 hexadecimal digits. So pure red is written as hashtag FF0000. It's just another mathematical way to express the exact same color mixtures we just talked about with RGB, just packaged up in a much more compact format. Okay, let's level this up and look at our next format, HSL. This stands for hue, saturation, and lightness. While RGB is fantastic for how computers process light, HSL is often a much more intuitive way for artists and designers to actually visualize mixing their paint. Think of the hue part of HSL like a literal physical color wheel. It's measured in degrees, straight from 0 to 360. So instead of trying to mentally calculate how much red and green you need to mix to get yellow, you just pick the degree on the wheel that already corresponds to yellow. From there, you simply tweak your saturation and lightness percentages until it's perfect. Here's a really cool little trick to round out our color mixing. You can just tack an A onto the end of either RGB or HSL, making them RGBA or HSLA. That A stands for alpha, and what it does is simply add a transparency slider to your color. Just like RGB has strict boundaries, the alpha channel is strictly measured from 0, which is completely invisible or fully transparent, up to a max of 1, which is fully opaque. So a value of 0.5, that gives you exactly 50% transparency. Okay, so we've mixed our perfect, wonderfully transparent colors and our digital canvas is painted. But think about this for a second. How do we give character, tone, and actual shape to the messages we're trying to communicate? Because beautiful color just isn't enough on its own. Which brings us perfectly to section 3, mastering CSS font families, or what we can call your typography brushes. Before we go picking a very specific font, we have to choose a generic family. Let's clearly contrast the 2 main generic font families you'll see on the web. Serif fonts have those little decorative lines, or feet, at the ends of the characters. Sans serif fonts, on the other hand, do not have those extra lines. They're totally clean and straight at the edges. Once you know your generic family, then you can specify the exact font face. Take Georgia, for example. It is a perfect absolute classic of a specific font family that falls right under that serif category. You tell the user's browser you want Georgia, and the great thing is, if it somehow can't find it, it'll gracefully fall back to a generic serif font instead. All right, final stretch, section 4, controlling font size and style, where we really shape the user experience. CSS is just ridiculously flexible when it comes to sizing your text. The font size property gives you 3 distinctly different methods to dial things in. You can use absolute values, relative values that scale based on the surrounding text, or straight-up percentage values to scale your text up or down perfectly. There's actually this massive built-in scale for absolute sizing too. CSS gives us these predefined keyword options that run from an incredibly tiny XX small all the way up the ladder to XX large. It completely takes the guesswork out of standardizing your text hierarchy across a whole site. And sitting right smack in the middle of that keyword scale is the medium value. This is a big deal because medium serves as the standard baseline text size for web elements. So whenever you're using percentages or relative sizes like smaller or larger, you are very often scaling relative to this exact medium baseline. But size isn't everything, right? We can give our text some serious attitude. Using the font style property, we can throw in an italic or oblique slant to really emphasize specific words. On top of that, we have the font variant property, which is an awesome way to create a stylized small caps effect, where your lowercase letters actually look like scaled down uppercase letters. Finally, we've got to consider visual weight. The font weight property dictates exactly how thick or bold your text is. You can literally step it up sequentially using descriptive keywords, starting way down at lighter, moving to normal, stepping up to bold, and maximizing the chunkiness at bolder. But hey, if you're the kind of developer who prefers absolute precision over descriptive words, you don't even have to use terms like bold or lighter. You can use a numeric scale. This scale steps up by hundreds, 100, 200, 300, and so on, and it caps out precisely at the numeric value of 900 for the absolute thickest, heaviest text you can render on the web. So pulling all of this together for you, from crunching the math on RGB color combinations to the structural choices between serif and sans serif, all the way to perfectly weighting your typography at a solid 900, these CSS properties are way more than just lines of code. They give you total, uncompromised creative control over the digital canvas. They are exactly what separate a bland, boring document from a truly engaging visual experience. As we wrap up this explainer, I just want you to keep one thing in mind. Literally every single pixel, every colorful background, and every letter you read online today is dictated by these very properties. So now that you've got a firm grasp on the tools inside the artist's digital toolkit, what kind of digital canvas are you going to paint?